Next up, we have Kansas, Tim Cunningham for his fueling project.
Probably like most of you, KDOT, Kansas DOT, has their own fueling infrastructure across all of the state. And a lot of the management of that fuel falls under our equipment section, Jeff and myself. Just to give you a little bit of background of what that looks like in Kansas, we have probably 120 some stations, locations where we've got tanks. We have automated some of those locations over the years. We've been through a progression of hardware. Right now we're on gas buoy where we've automated those. We allow other non-KDOT agencies to fuel at our locations. We started out with law enforcement locations, our highway patrol come and get fuel from us. And those automated stations, they're usually 24/7, so they're outside of our secure fences, so they can come in without a key and get fuel as long as they have a key fob and access fob. Most of our locations, we are transitioning from underground storage tanks because of all the EPA regs into above ground storage tanks. So we've made that transition to where we probably have well over, 90% of those tanks are above ground. We probably purchase our fuel through the most labor-intensive processes you could imagine, least efficient. We do the 3 bids and a buy at every location for every single drop of fuel, and it overwhelms us. And in some of our locations we are well undersized with tanks, especially because we sell to other agencies in that, and so it's really something that we have a lot of room for improvement. Probably 10% of our diesel and 60% of our unleaded is consumed by other agencies currently. It depends on the time of year and the likes, but and the locations. Like most of you, we have the small garages in a county, and those are just primarily diesel tanks, and other agencies aren't running a lot of diesel equipment, and so they're more interested in the unleaded tanks at the higher volume locations, and so we can kind of target those and automate those. Typical of a location for us that is automated, this is a newer location. We started putting split tanks in instead of 2 separate above ground tanks, and so that's now kind of become our standard when we upgrade. In this case, that's a 6,000 gallon unleaded and a 4,000 gallon diesel, and you see there beside it is our gas buoy reader. That's kind of older generation technology for gas buoy right now. That's their Islander Plus, they call it. I see Tim here in the room, and he loves selling me the new generation stuff. More typical for us scattered around the state at our sub areas is what we call them, is something like this, where we've got an above ground tank, single product, single dispenser. Our non-automated sites, how do we handle that? I know I've talked to some folks in the West who cannot believe that we don't have some sort of security on those tanks. They're behind a gate. We rely on the operator to write down what vehicle they're fueling up and how much it is when it comes up on the dispenser. Okay, you got 24.7 gallons. They write 24.7 gallons and they fill it out on the fuel issue sheet. And when that sheet gets filled, then they fax that sheet into their administrative office at another location, and those folks key it into our legacy mainframe system that keeps track of that, and that's how tanks get reconciled. That's the dispensing part of it. The receiving part of it is when somebody orders that fuel after getting 3 bids, then they enter how much they got and what the cost of the fuel was into our current mainframe system. And so there's that side of the house that's keeping track of the cost of the fuel, and then there's the other process that we key it in and they take care of the dispensing, and then somebody manually writes it down so that they can reconcile their tanks at the end of the month. Plus, we ask somebody there on site to stab the tank and make sure that the level is what we think it should be, and if it's not, then they have to do those corrections and the likes. And here recently in 2021, we invested with Gas Buoy's help into their new software system that they've partnered up with, and I may not be saying this right, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is ECOS, and they all fall under the Gilbarco umbrella, Gas Buoy, ECOS, Veeder-Root, Gilbarco, all those guys are all kind of under that same umbrella. Our automated systems were on our, that we were running prior to ECOS were all run through our current local area network, and so we were running communication lines out to the stations where we were automated, and it was, busting through the firewall and doing all those things, and then we were managing that internally on a server up in headquarters. And it worked pretty well. I mean, it's instantaneous. Somebody gets fuel, and you could see that transaction almost instantaneously. When you issue new keys out, it sends it to all 28 stations, and somebody with that key could immediately go out and get fuel. However, we have those firewall issues and all that, and there's a big push in Kansas, similar to probably some of you, to start working with hosted services so that you don't have to maintain those servers within the state. One of the things this allowed us to do was to go to a hosted network and remove that communication completely out of our network, and so we've installed modems everywhere to communicate through the cloud into the ECOS, and we have access to that information, but there's a delay through a modem, it only updates every 30 minutes or so. We also equipped all of our non-automated tanks with smart tank monitors, so wireless tank monitors that you screw into a port on that tank, and it, through cell connections, will call into a service, and it will connect with ECOS. And so now we can see all of our stations and their tank levels. We have some of those stations that are using the VEDER route, the more traditional tank monitors, and those are connected through that same modem network. So now for the first time we have visibility into tank levels all across the state. This is the home page of ECOS, and I debated on whether I ought to do a presentation on what it all looks like and what's all there. And it's busy, and I don't think that would make a great presentation, but I wanted to show you kind of what it looked like. So you can do all the things you would expect to be able to do as far as looking at all those transactions, managing your keys, assigning new keys out. For us, we use what we call key fobs. In Gasboy language, it's the MyFair key. It's just an RFID key that you access, that you present to the reader, and it knows then what vehicle it's assigned to. You can also have one of those keys assigned to operators, so you can identify who it is doing it. We've elected not to do that so far. We just identify the vehicle. You can also have pins, that an operator would have to put in there. There's a long list of flexible options that you have to do this. You can limit, the capacity of the tank. You can limit the fuel type that you're allowed to get, all those sorts of things, which we do. But you get to see all the transactions, where they happen, what time of day. You can look up what the tank levels are at all of the stations. You can reconcile all of your tanks through this one network. But the one thing that ECOS now offers, and we're just now, we have yet to really take advantage of it, but we're positioning ourselves to take advantage of it, is this bulk fuel module. You see the first little icon there, and that is managing the fuel purchasing process. It will allow us to roll the responsibility of getting that fuel purchased up to the next level up, or the next level up, or the next level up. Ideally, it would be great to have one person on staff managing fuel purchases for the whole state, and to have a contract in place, and to be able to just say, okay, I need fuel at this list of locations, so drop fuel today. And that's all possible here with this system. Right now we have 50 people making decisions probably across the state, buying different products. One of the things we struggle with in the winter is what winter blend of fuel. Well, we gelled up back in 1972 once, and so we're going to get 100% number one diesel, or, clearly that's a bit of an exaggeration, but the blends that are being requested in some of our locations are a bit ridiculous, and they don't really care so much about the cost because they're not necessarily paying that bill. We need to do a better job internally in managing that process and rolling the responsibility of managing those tanks up higher. The other problem is we're taking delivery sometimes of 500 gallons or 800 gallons of fuel, and there's a cost to that. If we could get a transport load and chain locations together, certainly that makes a big difference for us. We are going to make ECOS be the system of record for all of our fuel. The other nice thing that it offers is they've partnered up with WEX, and so we can manage WEX cards within the system. We can order new cards. We can see all of the WEX transactions. So any transactions outside of our network that are happening commercially will show up within this system. And so you can see all the fueling for all of that vehicle, throughout the year, throughout the years, whatever. That's not something we have visibility into right now. We're looking forward to that. It also manages all of the documentation. So through that whole purchase process, you can request fuel be delivered. You can see a bill of lading. You can follow that and see all of the documentation throughout the process, I'm told. We haven't instituted that just yet, but we're getting closer. One nice thing is they have access to current pricing and pricing indexes within the system, and it comes at no extra cost. And so they get DTN pricing is what I think it's called, Tim, similar to Opus. So you can see what that index is. If you want to structure your contracts to be cost plus or whatever from that index, that would work for us. You can see what the current rack price is. You can see where all the racks are that are connected to your locations. You can input all of your suppliers, all of your contracts or whatever, and managing it within this system. So it's a really powerful tool, one that we hope maybe next year we'll have a lot better information to share about how well that's working, but it has a lot of promise. What does it cost? Clearly, I'm not a salesman and I don't want to be a salesman. For us, we have all of our stations in it, and you pay per location and you pay per module, and we've embedded all of the cost of all of the communication for those modems into this as well. And so for us, currently, it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $125,000 annually. We think we can save that just because we spend so much on our fuel and we do it in such a ridiculous way. I think this will force us to do things that'll save a lot of money, and that we're willing to pay that. My perspective right now on ECOS, this has been a project that has been underway for some time, and I really thought we would be further along, in all honesty, than we are. When we agreed to move in that direction, I did not realize that we were probably one of the first DOTs that will be on the network. We did talk to the state of Utah, and Utah, it's not their DOT that does all their managing of their tanks, it's somebody larger than that with all of the agencies, and they are on it and love it, and they're structured a little differently than we are. And so what we found is that there's some things that are lacking that we needed to have ECOS adjust for us. The report generation, the key management, the roles that are available for you to assign users don't match us very well from what we are used to. And so one nice thing is the folks at ECOS have been willing to work with us and change their system. And they're learning a lot about us as a community of DOTs and how we work from us, and I think it'll benefit other customers down the road. There's a ton of flexibility within the system. I'm still trying to figure out where all of the cubby holes are of data. Sometimes it's a little hard for me. This may be more a reflection of me than ECOS, but sometimes it's hard for me to know exactly where I need to go to get what I need. As I said before, ECOS has been eager to work with us. It's forced us to rethink how we do business, which has been a good thing. And I do think that there's a significant opportunity to save in cost and and a real savings in labor, I think, once we're fully implemented. So I guess that's the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Brian with VDOT, thanks for the presentation.
Yep.
How do you recoup or roll your costs for the infrastructure of having the sites? Do you add that to the price of fuel that you charge your other customers, or how do you manage that part? If you could give us a little brief overview of that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, right now we don't. So that's pretty brief. We do not. I have gone to our leadership and said, hey, here's a really good opportunity for us to recapture some of the cost of this system by a slight surcharge for our fuel, especially to other agencies. At that time, it's like, ooh, that could get sticky politically. Right now, KDOT has been viewed as the bank of the state. We have funds that other agencies wish that they had because our funding structure is a little different than some of the other agencies. And so by us, sticking it to some of these other states, that potentially could come back and bite us a little bit. So we're saying, hey, this is a nice service. We're good people, really. You shouldn't feel bad about that. So we're not recouping that, and we're also not building that price into any of our internal costing, which is something maybe we should be doing, based on what Henry was saying, and that research is probably something we'll be looking at a little bit just to know better what that cost is. But yeah, right now we're not taking advantage of that.
David May used to manage the fuel program for the great state of Iowa. Pleasure to be here today. My question for you, Tim, is what are you doing regarding routine maintenance for all of these facilities? Do you have a program by which those tanks are cleaned with any regularity?
We don't have a statewide program where we're doing that, but most of our districts are on board with a management program where they're going out every year, twice a year. I'm looking at Jeff because he's way more intimately involved, but most of them will go out twice a year and pull the sludge out of these tanks if there is such a thing. They'll use the bacon bomb and see what's there, and we've got tools to help us then pull the stuff off of the bottom. We will treat if necessary. Some folks are better at putting additives in to manage that process than others, but we're getting better at it. Above ground tanks seem to require a little more of that since the the fluctuation in temperatures and the fuels that are involved anymore. So,
just a quick question that's kind of related to what David was saying.
Yeah.
What about the environmental side of it? Are you guys required to tank test, or like for instance, Maryland, we have to run a constant leak test on every one of our tanks and prove that to our Department of Environment that we are not leaking. It's above ground and below ground.
No, yeah,
we're pulling
no.
them out like you did, but
we're not. As far as I know some of the requirements are in flux right at the moment. I think there are some new requirements that have mostly affected underground tanks, but right now on above ground tanks, we're not having to do leak tests. We are required to reconcile, and obviously if there were a big difference, I think you would see it before you would notice it on a reconciliation form, but we don't have EPA requirements, or in our case, KDHE, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, is sort of the EPA arm within Kansas. There aren't additional above ground tank requirements, and so that's the big push for us to get out of the ground. I'm sure there's a wide difference in the room on that. All right, thank you.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.